Hello, I'm Reverend Dr. Victor Fuhrman, and I'm on the board of directors of the A.R.E. of New York City. It is my pleasure today to interview Dr. Pearl Wilkinson. Dr. Pearl is the founder and naturopath for Pearl Wellness and Detox, an innovative and research-based holistic health practice in New York City and beyond. With more than 20 years of experience, she specializes in fasting and detoxing for health and spiritual well-being. She holds a Master of Divinity from Yale Divinity School and is board certified through Trinity College of Natural Health. Her journey includes prestigious studies at Amherst College and the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, as well as international research and travel focused on holistic health. Dr. Wilkinson's practice also includes spiritual direction for individuals of all faiths and backgrounds, aiming to help clients achieve mind body spirit integration for the most balanced, whole, healthy, and vibrant version of themselves. Additionally, she founded The Well and the Way, a charitable 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to holistic health, education, spirituality, faith-based development, and community outreach. Through this organization, she actively supports inner city communities, promoting health and wellness initiatives that address physical and spiritual needs. Please join me in welcoming to this wonderful recording Dr. Pearl Wilkinson. Welcome, Dr. Pearl.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Wonderful to be here.
Dr. Pearl, please share with us your early path and how it led to your calling.
So early in my years, I was definitely exposed to the Edgar Cayce readings. It's one of the most foundational elements that you would know if you knew my family and I at those tender young years. My mother came in across the Edgar Cayce readings in the late 70s, and she spent the first 10 years of my life with Search for God, Bronx Group number 1. And in Search for God, Bronx Group number 1, there were a handful of adolescents, and we were all in the next room while our parents were studying Search for God material, REOming, meditating, and doing all the other things that typically happen at a Search for God group. So you can imagine in my early formative years, I had some sense that something mystical was happening around me, even though I may not have had that vocabulary. It was very apparent that there was a mystical movement in my home and a welcoming energy towards who God is as a person. The other really early formative piece of my upbringing was even beyond the Search for God and the Edgar Cayce work, a deep interest in spiritual matter as a whole and developing a very intentional connection with divine as the source. There was also an incredible open-mindedness. So even though I was raised Catholic, and not just Catholic, I was also heavily exposed to the charismatic movement, which is very reliant on the experience and fruits of the Holy Spirit, the gifts of the Holy Spirit. We were also heavily exposed to Cayce Christian theology and Christocentric theology that was also very inclusive. So you can imagine this wide array of spiritual parameters, this almost smorgasbord, everything from Cayce to Catholicism to the charismatic movement of the early 80s while being raised in the inner cities in the Bronx, New York City. So that really shaped me in a huge way and set me up to know that no matter what else I did with my life, I would always be looking for God to center me and for a universal spirit that would anchor me in this incarnation.
Now, I understand that the Casey teachings were multi-generational in your family. Tell us about that.
Correct. So soon after my mom came across the Cayce readings in the late 70s, she was actually at our family chiropractor's office in Brooklyn when she came across a Search for God pamphlet, quickly got involved. And then at that point, became more and more engulfed in everything Cayce she could get her hands on. And that led to a lifetime association with Lynn Michelli, one of the former directors of the A.R.E. Center, and many other pioneers in the New York City area for Search for God and Edgar Cayce work. Now, around that same time, my mother introduced her mother, my grandmother, also to the work of Edgar Cayce, and my grandmother, having a background as an allopathic trained nurse from the Caribbean, took an immediate interest to the health readings. And not only was my grandmother an allopathic nurse, her mother, my great grandmother, was also an allopathic nurse. And practicing nursing in the Caribbean has generally been known to be a more integrative practice than it is here in the States, and that how it's traditionally been practiced in many countries. And so when she got hold of the Cayce material, she ran with it too. And she ran with it ultimately more so in the health direction, whereas my mother was covering all topics of Cayce. Now, she started seeking out Dr. Riley, Dr. Harold Riley's care as her primary physician when he had an office in Rockefeller Center. And she started traveling with my grandfather down to the beach annually for different Cayce Riley conferences, where she got heavily involved in practicing an alkaline diet, juicing, enemas, cleaning out the large intestines, and doing castor oil packs and a host of other Cayce remedies that she learned through Dr. Harold Riley. She ran with this so much that by the time she was in her 60s, she actually became so fit and so healthy based on the Cayce readings. She started running marathons globally, going from someone who was the majority of her life a sedentary nurse and mother, probably very active in terms of her life, raising 6 daughters, but otherwise sedentary, and then has this whole almost renaissance in her life because of the Cayce work, gets involved with New York Road Runners, is applying all the things, comes to know some of the pioneers in the health movement in New York City, such as Gary Knoll, takes off at the same time that my mother is really having a brand new life spiritually in her attitude towards raising children, in her attitude towards raising me and my siblings. My grandmother is taking off in the health direction and in athleticism because of the Cayce readings. This was an incredible exposure of a generational movement of having and displaying extreme levels of freedom in confidence in what our human potential is here because of the Cayce readings. So really a huge part of my life.
Tell us about your pursuit of divinity studies.
So around 2015, I was already in practice on the Upper West Side in a private practice, which we might get into later. And at the time, I wasn't married and I didn't have children. And I looked up and I said, Lord, surely you want me to be doing more in these years than just running a private practice on the Upper West Side. Now I look back and I think, okay, running a practice was plenty, especially those were in my early 30s. But nonetheless, I did say that to the Lord. And so I started at a more evangelical school in Nyack, more mainstream theology, because it was convenient. They had both a Nyack campus and a New York City campus, and I could toggle between the two and still make it in to see my patients. Well, long story short, in the middle of the night, the Lord called me in a dream. And of course, being raised as a Cayce baby, I was very familiar with dream study and applying, not just studying the dream, but then applying the wisdom. And in the middle of the night, I heard a divine voice tell me very clearly, you're leaving this divinity school and I'm sending you to Yale. And it was even disclosed how it would be paid for. And so I promptly went ahead and applied to transfer from the divinity school I was then at in Nyack to Yale Divinity School. I'd always thought that I would go to Harvard Divinity or Harvard for graduate or undergraduate. However, when my mom and I visited Harvard Divinity, we had a hard time sensing the presence of the Holy Spirit. And that's something that I've always tried to follow in my life, irrespective of where I find myself or who I'm surrounded by, is to pursue peace and to listen for the movement of that still small voice and the experience of the Holy Spirit. So as you can imagine, I followed that dream that was also very steeped in all sorts of imagery of the Holy Spirit. I won't get into the details, but it was a very animated dream to say the least. And then by the next fall, within 8 months, I was then enrolling at Yale Divinity School and running a practice in New York while living now in Connecticut, pursuing the Masters of Divinity. My primary reason for wanting to be in divinity school is that I knew in my holistic health practice something was missing if I didn't have the full language and cultural relevance to talk about who God is with people of multiple different faith backgrounds and spiritual backgrounds in a professional capacity. I felt very strong at that point in my life in discussing who God is for me and my faith in a personal way. But it was this big leap to say, okay, I want to transfer some of this passion for our experience as divine beings on earth into my professional life. And I felt I needed guidance and some authority to do that well and to really do it in a circumspect, thoughtful way where I was not interjecting myself into my patient's or client's life, but rather walking mindfully alongside them. So the Yale Divinity School was a good fit. They were more open-minded, and I was able to discuss some Cayce in the classroom and write some papers on Cayce, and ultimately sharpen my toolkit to really not just treat the body, but start with source, spirit as the source, right? Because that's what we learn in the Cayce work, is that spirit is the source. And so I wanted to be able to journey with my clients from who they were experiencing themselves as spiritually, then to the mind, and finally to the body, where up until that point, before the divinity degree, I felt a bit stagnant or intimidated by the idea of saying, no, I need to go into this very sacred ground with my clients. So I went for the divinity training. It took 5 years and it was incredibly worth it. And that was my second term. That's the second terminal degree.
You had mentioned the still, soft voice within. Who do you think that voice is, or do you know who that voice is?
Such a great question, Victor. I would love to hear how you answer that question, but I know you're asking me. Uh, when the still soft voice has come from God, there's always been a very clear, I have spoken vibrational element around me where there's no mistaking it. And I have had moments both in my waking life and my sleeping life where I know I've received a message and it's so clear and poignant. And it almost as if energetically and vibrationally, I can feel the signature of the supreme power. So it's an energetic signature that lets me know that was the still small voice speaking, that was not just my own higher consciousness. And then at other times in visions and auditory experiences, both awake and asleep, I know that it's coming from something higher and outside of myself, but I can't say for sure that it's God. But I say, okay, that must have been an angel or a messenger or a guide from a past life, someone I know who to be as a trusted authority. And that also leaves me quite taken aback. And it's always an experience of, oh, I just heard something, I received something, almost like receiving a piece of mail, a letter in the mail that's very important. So it has a certain heft to it. And then other times, I think the still soft voice is part of my higher consciousness communing and almost having a dialogue, and I'm receiving some answer, something I've prayed about. And I might not know where, but if it brings peace and I receive that same message in a number of different formats, then I trust it.
I had a calling that led me to an organization called the New Seminary of New York back in the mid 1990s.
Oh,
And the
yeah.
wonderful teacher and founder used to have an expression. He would say, everything is unfolding in divine order. We may not see it, we may not understand or recognize it, but ultimately, if we view it with spiritual eyes rather than human eyes, we'll see there's a plan and a purpose for everything. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Everything is unfolding in divine order. And towards that end, I keep the divinity, excuse me, the serenity prayer close to me because I think it's one of the ways that I stay grounded in this idea that everything is unfolding in divine order. And I can ask for the serenity to see it as such, even when my consciousness is not naturally moving there. And that would be just one of the many attunements I use throughout my day and my week to say, okay, God is here. God is in control. How do I move back into the divine flow so that I'm more open to God's will and not my own? And I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. And it also looks like you're sharing in synchronicities, that you've had all these wonderful things unfold before you, and you've had the choice to either pursue them or not pursue them. And every time you said yes, the next one would come, and the next one would come.
That is true. And I think in every point in my life where I may not have been seeking that divine voice or that divine influence, I saw that the fruit that was yielded from that event or circumstance was lesser fruit or not as enjoyable. And there was a lot of learning in my 20s and 30s to get to the point where it's like, no, when I hear that voice, I want to heed it. I want to follow and apply it to the best of my ability without a spirit of condemnation. That was one of the key things I feel like I always walk with from the Cayce readings is God is not looking to condemn us, and therefore we should not be in a condemning spirit with ourselves. So it's an invitation to self to say, okay, we're going to follow and we'll do this as best as I can, and then give the results back to God and not be in a judgmental place with how I do my best, essentially.
Wonderful, absolutely. Tell us about functional medicine and how it applies to your practice.
So I wound up in functional medicine, and in the way it applies to my practice, in a rather circuitous path. It was not direct by any means. And I started at Amherst College in undergrad as a liberal arts major while my best friend was pre-med. And I couldn't see where I felt personally called to medicine because I didn't know how to connect it to the Cayce readings. And the Cayce readings and my spiritual life were such huge motivating factors that if I couldn't relate something back to who God is, my spiritual life, or Edgar Cayce, I would just feel like lost. And so I became a teacher right out of undergrad, and that was very useful. I became a Montessori teacher. It taught me a lot about education. But lo and behold, that really wasn't the true path for me. And so before long, I said, I need to do something that's closer to the mission. And I started as a certified holistic health counselor. I moved, at that time, I was living in California. I moved back to the East Coast. I, in fact, moved back to Virginia Beach, and for a while was working under John Van Auken in Spanish language membership and publications, and helping do my part with the first Latin American Congress in Ecuador under Kevin Tedeschi. And so I was getting closer, I was getting warmer, but even still, I don't think that membership and publications was exactly my calling. And so I said, okay, it's time to go deeper in this calling to certified holistic health coaching and counseling. And so I decided at that point, I'd already had maybe a dozen, maybe somewhere between 12 and 18 colonics in my life. And they had been transformational in my spiritual life. They had been transformational in my healing life. And something inside me said, whenever I would meet someone who hadn't had a colonic, I'd want to bring them to the Cayce Riley Spa in Virginia Beach and introduce them to colon hydrotherapy. And then one time a friend said, would you like to come in the room with me? And I thought that was a rather odd request. To have me in the room while they're having a colonic felt a bit too intimate for my taste. But I said, if this will help them grow on their physical healing journey, why not? There's no harm in it. We asked the therapist said yes. When the therapist saw how happy I was for the person receiving the colonic to have such a successful session, she said, you probably want to consider this. And I thought, me? And I just, that was a big jump. But lo and behold, I prayed about it, and I took to heart that Cayce said that every well person should have a colon cleansing at the minimum with the change of the season. So that's 4 times a year. And I meditated on it, and I prayed about it, and I got a yes. And so I went ahead, and my next certification, board certification, was in colon hydrotherapy with one of my teachers in Florida, whose name is Kathy Shea, an amazing colon hydrotherapy teacher. And I came back to New York and started practicing colon hydrotherapy combined with nutrition. and very much influenced both by the Cayce readings in terms of more and more alkalinity in the diet, less and less the foods that would add and become a dross to the system or a weight or a burden to the system, looking for foods that allow the lymph to move fluidly and in health, and really putting together all I knew myself about the Cayce-Riley approach to health. And so I felt, well, this still isn't quite enough. So again, I'm making my way, inching my way closer and closer to functional medicine. And so then I started adding on scans and labs, which I had authority to do as part of the Association of Drugless Practitioners in the US. I have authority to be reading and looking at some certain kinds of labs, but not prescribing any pharmaceutical medicines. And I said, okay, this is closer. And I said, okay, it's about time now to just put it all together. And so I had already previously started a degree at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. And that was really the final step, is becoming a board certified naturopath helped me to say, okay, now I'm truly in the space of bringing and tying together all I've learned about naturopathy, about Western diagnostics and Western understanding of the body, and marrying that together with my Cayce foundation. And functional health is the best way to really include a space that honors Western diagnostics and what someone might present with from a sickness or disease mentality, with the life-giving principles of the Cayce readings, but also have it be familiar to popular and modern audiences. And so when you bring that all together, the function is looking at the root cause of why the body's out of balance. And that is the thing I heard time and time again in the Cayce reading, is Cayce giving someone 2 or 3 foundational ideas about why are they sick. Is it a mental attitude? Is it a spiritual reason? Is it that the body is too acidic? Is there a blockage in the spine? And then putting it all together in a reading. And so I just said, well, I seek to do as close to what I can do that mirrors or is likened to what Cayce did, although of course I don't have the gift of doing readings, at least not just yet. And so that landed me in functional medicine, putting it all together. And it was a journey that was spanned over 15 years.
What is the gut microbiome and why is its care so important?
Oh my goodness. The gut microbiome is the microbiota and the environment largely in the small and large intestines. And research is showing that there are all of these pathways and links, direct correlates between the health of the gut microbiome, how many beneficial bacteria and alkaline, positive, oxygenated, healthy tissues in the small intestines, and how that correlates directly to the health of every other system in the body, be it brain health, be it hormonal health or endocrine health, kidney health, bladder health, you name it, digestive issues, mood, stressor issues. It's all being proven now that the gut in the small intestines is the second brain of the body and is a really important piece, missing link, if you will, in understanding the overall health. And Cayce said that really 70% of health starts and ends in the gut, and that includes the large intestine, which is also the colon. So it sometimes is referring to both the small and large, and more research is supporting this understanding that the more healthy bacteria and the healthier that microenvironment is, the healthier the overall person will be on every level.
So there's a lot of truth to the expression, I'm having a gut reaction or I feel it in my gut.
Absolutely.
That's
Yes.
wonderful. That's wonderful. How is all of this a pathway to higher consciousness?
I think this is one of my most favorite topics, Victor. And this is all a pathway to higher consciousness, because once you've, or anyone in general has familiarized themselves with the idea that their internal hygiene and the internal health of their organs is producing the quality of life they're having. So that's the first step, is understanding, as Cayce and many others have said, you are what you eat and what you think primarily. So a combination of how you're feeding yourself will over time inform the health of the gut microbiome. Your thoughts will also help determine the health of the gut microbiome and the health of the body overall. And then we can go a step further once that foundation is laid. Okay, so we're understanding that gut health is determining many other biomarkers and pathways to health in the body overall, irrespective of what glandular system we're talking about or what bodily system. It could be cardiovascular or it could be hormonal, as I said before. It doesn't matter. We are learning through research that more and more of this is all determined by the gut. Once we're there, the next thing I've really focused in on is, wow, our command center for the body and for life is in the brain. And so much of our brain health and cognitive health is also informing our lives and the quality of lives we have. And it's also an important spiritual center for our connection with God. So when we clean the gut, but by de facto, we're able to heal our brains of inflammation, of environmental toxins, and also detox is an important step there. Our consciousness naturally unfolds much like the lotus flower that is so often a symbol of spirituality and higher consciousness in Eastern traditions. The consciousness, the flower of consciousness gently begins to open to more and more subtle vibratory experiences. And naturally, as someone's consciousness opens and they become more aware of life around them on multiple other dimensions, there is an opportunity to develop the higher consciousness at a more rapid pace and a more direct pathway than if someone were trying to develop spiritually, but leaving the body healing out of the equation. So I've come to see now that as we endeavor to heal the body through the gut, one of the major and exciting opportunities is to not only heal from cognitive and mental brain diseases and states of brain inflammation and all their toxicity that is making brain health harder and harder, but we can go a step further and say, not only will we heal the gut, heal the brain, we can also now commune with God in a pure relationship. And Cayce talks about this in that when the blood is cleaner, the access to the divine will also be strengthened. And as he said, the mind, the body, and the spiritual self are all one. We can't separate them. So naturally, from a Cayce perspective, healthier body, healthier spiritual life.
This is a topic that would take an entire day to go through completely, but we'll just do a very brief discussion. So, how do we move from that acidic toxicity to the alkalinic intense internal sense?
I think the first thing is to really know the ideal, as Cayce says, start with the ideal and really be clear, why do we want to move from an acidic state to an alkalinity state? Oftentimes when Cayce was giving a reading, he would ask someone, why do you want to be well? What would you do differently with your life? And even in the Bible, when Jesus healed someone, and then he would often say, okay, now go and sin no more. Essentially, we need to know what we're living for and have a clear ideal that we hope is one that will bring about greater good in one's own activities and in the world at large. So in order to move from an acidic state to an alkaline state, I first recommend anyone wanting to do that is to really know, why do they want to be healthier? What sparks joy? What is a life-giving, influencing factor in your life that causes you to want to be healthier? If that's clear, then I think it can sustain an individual in beginning the journey then to clean up the diet. After the ideal is set for greater health, in a greater state of attunement to the divine through an alkalizing diet, then we can say, okay, what do we need to clean up in our health? And I would say my three favorite places to begin is, one, to remove as best as possible sugar and all processed flours from the diet. They really create so many blocks and stymieing issues in the body. And it's hard to really know how good any one individual feel until those highly addictive substances come out. And those highly addictive substances are also interrupting gut health and causing systemic inflammation for the vast majority of people. So I say start with removing those two and then look to gently day by day include more of the Cayce diet and protocol, which is an 80% alkaline diet. So that means more salads at the noonday meal. Start with a fresh, leafy green romaine salad. His recommended ratio is 3 above to 1 below, or is it 2 above to 1 below? I think it's 3 above to 1 below in terms of the ratio of vegetables on the salad and where they're grown. 3 that are grown above the surface, 1 that's grown below the surface. Find that ratio. A healthy salad dressing that is olive oil or lemon juice. He also recommends you can use Cayce recommended collagen powder even before the collagen phase craze that we're now in. Cayce was decades and decades way before the trend and said, sprinkle some essentially gelatin powder is what he called it, but it is collagen. They're one and the same on your salad. So start with one meal a day where you, if you're listening, or someone you that is just generally speaking is able to then build upon, because that one salad will start to change the cravings for more healthful food over time. And we want to start with something that is accessible and affordable and not overly complicated or hard to do. And I think most people are pretty confident they can get in the kitchen, wash and chop up some lettuce, add some colorful vegetables on top, add a healthy salad dressing, and that can be the basis for the noonday meal. And that's a good start. If you take out those two things and you add in one, you're well on your way.
And as you discussed, this is one of the steps to holistic spiritual development.
Absolutely. As the body becomes more alkaline, the blood and organs can purify themselves as they're naturally made to do. It's no, it's a miracle and a mystery, but it's also everyday health that if we supply the body with the foods it needs, it will naturally cleanse and detoxify itself gently over time. As that happens, we will naturally fall into a state of greater alkalinity. That greater alkalinity will support us feeling and having an experience of greater and higher vibratory states. So more joy, more effortless peace, less feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, more ease walking through one's day. Some people notice, okay, all of a sudden they have more energy or desire to start moving. Maybe that begets a person's walking activity on a daily basis. There's so many, a myriad of choices, and everyone is so different. But if that alkalinization process starts to happen and you're consistent with it, chances are it will take off.
And gratitude.
Oh, gratitude. Gratitude is definitely something that I know that as people become more connected to their body through a healthier diet, they can experience gratitude effortlessly because they feel good. And as they start to notice how much better they feel, there's a relief. That's another open door invitation to take on an ideal of gratitude, or a posture, if you will, that helps you to feel even better. And it's a snowball effect.
Absolutely. Please tell us about your practice and your offerings.
Sure. So about 6 months ago, I'll take a step back. I was on Central Park West for about 10 years before COVID. And just 6 months ago, I reopened in the Riverdale area of the Bronx. We're right on Broadway near 231st Street, all the way up the 1 train, and very close to the 231st Street stop. And what I've done is created a space where someone can come for multidisciplinary healing approaches that incorporates many of the Cayce principles you've heard me share here today: colon hydrotherapy and healing the gut microbiome, doing biofeedback scans that help us in broad strokes to assess which imbalances in a person's body are needing more attention or priority before we can deal with other things, just really helping us to get to that root cause from a Cayce perspective. We also do spiritual counseling because that has to be part of understanding our access to the divine truly as the great healer and the great physician, and then inviting people to see me as just a servant of their own self-healing capacity and the divine healing capacity, where the majority of the work happens with some solid grounded guidance from me. So, yeah, my current practice marries those different elements. Again, the colon hydrotherapy, the nutritional health, detoxification, biofeedback scans, and spiritual counseling. And it's a joy and an honor. It's a mouthful to share because there's just so few times we talk about health and we're able to approach it all the way from sources, the spirit. Spirit is the source, mind is the builder, and physical is the result. But that's what we're truly working on every time I see a patient or client in office.
And how may viewers find out more about your offerings and make an appointment with you?
Sure. Our website is www.pearlwellnessdetox.com. That's all one word, pearlwellnessdetox.com. You can email me right at Dr. Pearl, no spaces or periods, Dr. Pearl at pearlwellnessdetox.com. And if you'd like to jump in and find more about our offerings, I do offer an intentional promotional rate to give people a chance to just learn more about their own healing capacity through an initial functional medicine assessment. And you can find out more about scheduling that functional medicine assessment. That is $47, I believe, after you take off an initial credit. I think it comes out to about 47, so very reasonable and this is a link that will probably be attached below, but it's pearl.repeatmd.app. And then there is that HTTPS stuff in the front that I can always easily mistake. But so we'll put that link below. But your best way to get in touch with us is either through the app, the website, www.pearlwellnessdetox.com, or an email to Dr. Pearl at pearlwellnessdetox.com. So those are the three main options. And I think those are really great ways for someone to just dip a toe in and not feel that they need to commit or even understand it all at the outset, but give themselves a chance, a gracious opportunity to learn more about self-healing through the timeless Cayce principles.
Dr. Pearl, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom and your great spirit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. An honor to be here again.